The wind rolled through the frontier town like a restless spirit, lifting dust from the dry streets and pressing it against the wooden storefronts. People had gathered in the center square, boots scraping against dirt, hats pulled low over uneasy eyes. Auctions were common here. Horses, land, cattle, tools, anything could be sold if a man owed enough. But today, something felt different. Heavier. She stood on the wooden platform alone. Her faded blue dress clung softly to her frame, the fabric stretched gently over the curve of her swollen belly. One hand rested there protectively, as if shielding the life inside from the stares surrounding her. 3 months ago, she had been a rancher's wife. Her husband had ridden out on a cattle drive and never returned alive. They said it was an accident. A spooked steer. A bad fall. But whispers had traveled faster than truth in this town. Now she was a widow. Pregnant. And drowning in debt that wasn't even hers. The bank had claimed her husband's land by law. The house, the horses, the fields, all gone with a signature and a stamp. But the debt hadn't disappeared. And when a woman had no property, no money, and no family nearby, the town found cruel ways to settle accounts. The auctioneer cleared his throat loudly, breaking the tense silence. As agreed, he announced, adjusting his vest, "We begin the bidding." No one cheered. No one smiled. The widow lifted her chin despite the tremble in her hands. She refused to cry here. Not in front of men who measured her worth like livestock. A voice from the crowd muttered, "She's strong enough to work." "Nose ranching," another added with a shrug. The auctioneer called out a starting number. Silence stretched like a drawn wire. Then Heavy Boots stepped forward through the dust. He didn't look like the others. His black coat was worn but clean. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, though nothing could fully hide the sharpness in his gaze. He carried himself like a man who didn't belong to towns or crowds. The lone cowboy. That's what they called him. He lived miles beyond the hills in a cabin few had seen up close. He came to town only for supplies and left before conversations could begin. "I'll bid," he said calmly. Heads turned. The widow's breath caught in her throat. She had seen him before, passing through the market, silent and distant. There was something in him that felt carved from stone. He named a number higher than the starting price. A couple of men shifted uncomfortably. One attempted to outbid him, but the cowboy's eyes lifted slowly to meet his. The challenge there wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. The man looked away. The auctioneer swallowed. Any higher? No one spoke. Sold. The word echoed harder than it should have. The widow stepped down from the platform slowly, her legs unsteady. She felt dozens of eyes follow her as she approached him. He didn't reach for her. Didn't grab her arm. He simply turned toward his horse. "We leave now," he said. That was all. She hesitated only a second before climbing up behind him. The town shrank behind them as hooves pounded against the earth. Dust rose, swallowing the square and the watching faces. They rode for miles in silence. The sun dipped lower, bleeding orange across the horizon. The wind grew colder as open plains stretched endlessly before them. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely steady. "You shouldn't have done that." He didn't answer. "You think you saved me," she continued quietly. "But you've put yourself in danger." His hands remained firm on the reins. "From who?" She swallowed, her fingers tightening in his coat. "My husband didn't die by accident." The horse slowed slightly. "He found something. On his last route. Something men kill for." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "They think he told me where it is." The cowboy's jaw hardened. "Did he?" She hesitated. "He tried." The wind swept between them, carrying more than cold. "They've been watching me," she said. "Waiting. Hoping I'd lead them to it. And now they'll watch me," he replied evenly. "Yes." She closed her eyes briefly. "And they won't just threaten. They'll burn. They'll shoot. They'll destroy anything in their path." "Good," he said quietly. She stiffened. "Good. I've been waiting for something worth fighting." She studied the back of his shoulders, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. This wasn't arrogance. It wasn't pride. It sounded almost tired. Night settled by the time they reached his cabin, tucked against rocky hills far from the main trails. A single lantern flickered near the doorway. The place was modest but solid, built by hands that knew survival. He helped her down carefully, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man with such rough edges. Inside, The cabin was warm. A fire crackled softly in the hearth. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her without meeting her eyes. "You're safe here," he said. She didn't drink. "You don't understand." He removed his gun belt and placed it on the table, each movement deliberate. "Explain it to me. They're organized, not random outlaws. They have men in town. Men with power." Her voice trembled now, not with weakness but urgency. "If they find out I'm here, they'll come." He walked to the window, peering into the darkness beyond the hills. "Let them." Her frustration flared. "Why would you risk your life for someone you don't know?" He was silent for a long moment. "Because I know what it looks like," he said finally, "when a crowd watches and does nothing." The weight in his voice carried something old and buried. Outside, far beyond the cabin's glow, 3 riders paused on a distant ridge. One pointed toward the faint lantern light. "So she's there." The leader adjusted his hat slowly. "Then we pay him a visit at sunrise." Inside, exhaustion finally overtook the widow. She sank onto the edge of the small bed near the wall. For the first time since her husband's death, she wasn't alone in the dark. "Why did you really bid?" she asked softly. He didn't turn around. "Because no one else would." She watched him as the firelight flickered against his silhouette. A man who claimed nothing, wanted nothing, feared nothing. But as the wind picked up outside and distant horses shifted in the hills, one truth settled between them. Her warning wasn't about gold. It was about war. And by morning, the lone cowboy would discover exactly how much her presence would cost him. The knock came just before dawn. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, controlled, and certain, like the hand of someone who already believed the door belonged to him. The lone cowboy was awake before the second knock landed. Years of sleeping alone in open country had trained his body to rise at the slightest shift in air. He was already sitting upright in the chair near the window, boots on, rifle within reach. Across the cabin, the widow stirred from the narrow bed. Fear passed over her face the instant she heard it. Another knock. Then a voice, smooth and almost friendly. "Open up. We just wanna talk." The cowboy stood without a word. He moved toward the door quietly, every step measured. He could feel her eyes on him, could sense the tension in her breathing. He raised one finger slightly without turning back. "Stay quiet." Outside, the sky was painted in pale gray. The world held that fragile stillness that comes just before sunrise, when even birds hesitate to sing. A third knock, harder now. "Don't make this difficult," the voice continued. "We know she's inside." The widow closed her eyes briefly. "It's them," she whispered. The cowboy lifted the latch and opened the door just enough to see 3 riders standing in front of the cabin. Their horses snorted clouds of steam into the cold air. The man in the center wore a dark coat and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mornin'," the leader said pleasantly. "State your business," the cowboy replied, his voice flat. "We're here for the woman. She ain't for sale." The man chuckled softly. "Oh, we ain't here to buy." Silence stretched between them like a drawn trigger. "She belongs to unfinished business," the leader added. "And you don't want to be part of that business." The cowboy stepped fully outside now, closing the door behind him. He didn't want stray bullets finding their way inside. "She belongs nowhere," he said calmly. The leader tilted his head. "Careful, you don't know what she's carrying." The cowboy's eyes hardened. "I know enough." Behind the door, the widow could hear every word. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain they could hear it too. She couldn't let him die for her. Not when he didn't even know the whole truth. She pulled the door open and stepped outside despite his silent warning. "Stop," she cried. All 3 riders shifted their attention toward her. The leader's smile widened. "There she is. You want me," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "Then take me." "Let him go." The cowboy's head snapped toward her. Anger flashed briefly across his face. Not at her, but at the situation. The leader laughed. "See, she understands how this works." She looked at the cowboy, her eyes shining. "You don't owe me your life." His expression didn't change. "I don't walk away from people." The leader sighed dramatically, as if disappointed in a stubborn child. "Last chance." The cowboy moved first. Gunfire shattered the morning silence. The first shot came from the rider on the left, splintering wood beside the cabin door. The cowboy dove sideways, rolling behind a water trough as he returned fire with deadly precision. One rider fell before he could even raise his rifle properly. Horses screamed and reared. Dust exploded into the air. The widow dropped to the ground behind the cabin wall, covering her ears as shots rang out in sharp bursts. The second rider fired wildly, panic replacing confidence. The cowboy waited for the briefest opening, then pulled the trigger. The man collapsed from his saddle. Only the leader remained. He fired twice, one bullet grazing the cowboy's shoulder. The impact spun him slightly, pain slicing through muscle. But he didn't fall. Instead, he advanced. The leader tried to mount his horse fully, but the cowboy's next shot shattered that plan. The man tumbled into the dirt, his gun flying from his hand. Within seconds, the fight was over. The leader lay wounded, struggling to breathe as dust settled around them. The sunrise finally broke across the horizon, painting the scene in golden light that felt almost cruel in its beauty. The cowboy approached slowly, rifle still aimed. "You have no idea what you've stepped into," the man coughed, blood staining his collar. "It's bigger than you, bigger than her." The cowboy pressed his boot against the man's chest, not cruelly, but firmly. "Then I'll make it smaller." Before he could decide whether to end it, a distant rumble echoed across the hills. More riders. The leader let out a weak laugh. "Told you." The cowboy didn't waste another second. He turned and hurried back to the cabin. "We leave. Now." She saw the blood soaking through his sleeve. "You're hurt. Not bad enough." He packed quickly. Water, ammunition, dried meat. He moved with the urgency of a man who understood timing was everything. "They won't stop," she said quietly as they stepped outside. "Neither will we." Smoke began to rise in the distance where additional riders approached. If they reached the cabin, they would burn it to the ground just to send a message. He lifted her onto the horse carefully despite his wounded shoulder, then mounted behind her. The animal bolted north toward the mountain pass. Wind cut against their faces as they rode hard across uneven ground. "You're losing everything because of me," she said over the pounding hooves. "I built that cabin with my own hands," he replied steadily. "I can build another." "That's not what I meant." He didn't respond. Hours passed before they slowed near rocky terrain where tracking would become difficult. The mountains loomed ahead, jagged and unforgiving. There, as they paused briefly to water the horse, she finally spoke the full truth. "My husband found gold," she said. "A hidden vein in the canyon cliffs. He wasn't supposed to. It wasn't on any survey map." The cowboy's eyes narrowed slightly. "He wrote the location down," she continued. "But he never carried the paper on him. He was careful." "They think you have it." "Yes. And do you?" She hesitated only a moment before reaching inside her dress. From a hidden seam, she pulled a small folded piece of paper, worn but intact. "I memorized it, in case something happened." He stared at her, surprised by the strength behind her fear. "You could have run," he said. "I was tired of running." Behind them, faint figures appeared again on the horizon. He looked toward the narrowing mountain pass ahead. It would be dangerous, steep, hard to defend, but easier to control. He adjusted his hat slightly and met her eyes. "Then we stopped running." For the first time since her husband's death, something shifted inside her. Not hope exactly, but partnership. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. As they rode into the shadow of the mountains, the lone cowboy understood something clearly. He hadn't just claimed a widow at an auction. He had stepped into a war over buried gold, powerful enemies, and a future that now included more than himself. And somewhere within those cliffs, under rock and blood and greed, lay a secret that would either destroy them or give them a reason to fight for something more than survival.